Phantom Tales. Your fear starts now.
We kick off our Sunday morning radio show with a cheerful good morning.
My joints were acting up, worse than usual today, even though the weather was clear and warm. Damn spring. I leaned against the white kitchen counter, struggling to my feet, and shuffled over to the sink. Setting down my mug of unfinished tea, I tried rinsing it out, but the faucet wouldn't budge. My gnarled, aging hands twisted and cramped with pain, like some invisible force was prying each finger loose with a crowbar, taking its sweet time. God damn it! I cursed, loud and sharp, at no one in particular. Frustrated, I yanked open the drawer to the left of the sink, grabbed a plastic container of pills, and shook a few into my hand. Tossing them in my mouth, I chewed hard, wincing at the bitter taste. Figured it'd work faster that way. I slid the pill container back into the drawer, slammed it shut, and wandered over to the window. As I waited for the pain to ease up, my eyes locked on the playground outside, bathed in golden sunlight. The local kids were running wild, noisy shouting, laughter, and chaos filling the courtyard. Not a care in the world for them. Not yet, anyway. I've never been one for kids, never hid it either. I always made sure to share my thoughts with the clueless mothers who couldn't seem to control their rowdy brats. When the pain finally dulled to something bearable, I turned to the fridge, yanked it open, and stared at its meager contents. Looked like a trip to the store was in order. With a grunt, I slammed the door shut and shuffled off to the bedroom to get dressed. The old wardrobe I'd owned for decades greeted me with its familiar musty smell, mixed with the sharp tang of mothballs. I pulled a neatly folded pair of corduroy pants from the shelf and placed them on the bed. After a moment, I grabbed a light-colored flannel shirt with a big checkered pattern. I took it off the hanger and, grimacing through the dull ache in my shoulders, slipped it on over my well-worn white undershirt. I was about to shut the creaky wardrobe doors, but then paused. Reaching deep inside, I pushed aside a pile of old clothes and felt around, until my fingers brushed against a familiar loose board. With some effort, I pried it up and retrieved a small tin box hidden underneath. Sitting down on the edge of the bed, my pants still lying beside me, I held the box in my hands, like it was some kind of treasure. For a while, I didn't dare open it, but eventually, I gave in, pressing my thumbs against the top and lifting the lid. Inside was a collection of tiny, yellowed baby teeth. I shook the box gently, smiling faintly at the dry, satisfying rattle they made. Tilting it, I poured about 15 or so into my palm. Each one was different. Some small, some jagged where the pliers had slipped, leaving a sharp edge instead of a clean pull. Every tooth carried a memory. Is this one here? From a business trip to Wichita, a hot, sticky town with air that felt heavy and foul. Another, that one marked my 30th birthday. I came dangerously close to getting caught that time, too. Just missed being seen by some random folks in the park. And then, there were the two nearly identical ones taken not long after my wife, Linda, passed away so suddenly. Grief had to be dealt with somehow. Remarrying? That was never an option. I couldn't betray Linda's memory like that. My heart raced as I sifted through the teeth in my palm. Where was the first one? Frantically, my eyes scanned the pile until... there it was. A wave of relief washed over me. I picked it out from the box, holding it carefully. The first one. That one belonged to the neighbor's kid. A little punk who used to laugh behind our backs and call Linda a hunchbacked witch. My mouth went dry just thinking about it. I licked my cracked lips, swallowing hard. That was enough for one day. My pulse quickened, and a thin sheen of sweat broke out on my forehead. Snapping the box shut, I shoved it back into its hiding spot. I needed to focus. The pain in my chest was creeping back, clawing its way through my shoulder, biting down hard on my heart. Groaning, I placed the box on the nightstand and bent over to pull my pants on, struggling to fit them over my bony legs, streaked with bulging blue veins. Aside from kids, I'd always hated elevators. As long as my body allowed, I preferred the stairs. 9 floors? That used to be nothing, just a quick climb. But now it felt like a marathon. And today was one of those days when I had no choice but to give in. The new metal elevator doors slid open with a quiet hiss. I sighed resigned and stepped inside. The old elevators weren't much better. Rickety things with rattling doors and graffiti-smeared walls, but at least they had character. These new steel cages? Cold. Soulless. As the doors shut, I glanced at the flyers neatly tucked into plastic holders on the walls. One promised the best pizza in the neighborhood, 10% off the first order. Another invited families to a cozy cafe. And then, my eyes landed on a bright, colorful ad. Dear parents, summer is coming. Enroll your kids in our fun-filled summer camp. My stomach churned. A bitter taste rose in my throat. That damn ad dragged me back to a place I didn't want to go. Memories I'd worked so hard to bury clawed their way to the surface. I could still see those kids, bigger, stronger kids, mocking me, throwing me into that empty pool one summer evening. I'd been too small, too skinny to fight back. They'd pulled the ladder out, left me sitting there, humiliated and helpless. I didn't dare scream for help. The shame of yelling from the bottom of that pit was unbearable. Hours later, the counselors finally found me, scared half to death after realizing I'd gone missing. But for the rest of the camp, I was nothing but a joke. Water boy, that's what they called me, pointing, laughing, my lips pressed into a hard, thin line. Beneath the text of the ad was a picture of a smiling boy, no older than 8. His bright, innocent face mocked me in its own way, stirring something deep and dark I thought I'd buried for good. The boy in the photo. He had one eyebrow thick and dark, the other pale and thin, a striking, bizarre contrast. His face was dotted with multicolored smudges. His forehead? Smeared with something white, probably kid's face paint. That would explain the mismatched eyebrows. But despite his beaming smile, the image had an unsettling quality. Something about it was both repulsive and faintly frightening. I turned away sharply, jabbing the button for the first floor with a trembling hand. The elevator doors clanged shut with an unpleasant bang, and the cab lurched downward. My heart pounded, like a hammer on steel, threatening to burst through my chest with every thundering beat. What the hell was wrong with me today? First the damn joints, and now this stupid flyer. The day had barely started, but already it felt like a coiled rattlesnake, ready to strike. The elevator jolted suddenly, shuddered, then moved a bit more before giving one final violent shake and grinding to a halt. A second later, the lights flickered and went out. I gasped, fumbling around in the darkness for the control panel. My fingers slid over smooth, cold metal, searching, desperate, for the familiar raised buttons, but they weren't where I expected. Frustrated, I stopped and forced a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I needed light. My hands instinctively went to the pockets of my corduroy pants. In one pocket, I found my old flip phone, barely useful but dependable in a pinch. My fingers moved to the other pocket, and then I froze. There, nestled alongside the keys, was a small rectangular box. For a moment, my mind went blank. It was impossible. I was absolutely certain I'd put that tin box back in the closet. I replayed the morning in my mind. I'd set the box on the nightstand, pulled on my pants, and left for the stairwell. Yes, that's how it happened. So how could it be in my pocket? It didn't add up. Sure, I had moments, walking into the kitchen and forgetting why, nodding off in my chair in front of a blaring TV and waking up hours later in bed without remembering the steps in between. But this was different. This didn't make sense. I shook my head, telling myself it had to be some mistake, and reached further into my pocket. My keys jingled softly against the phone. At least I hadn't forgotten to lock the apartment. That was something. Suddenly, a soft chuckle echoed in the darkness. low and unmistakable. I froze. My hand slipped. The phone fell to the floor with a loud clatter, snapping shut and plunging the cabin back into complete darkness. I sat there, stiff as a board, my ears straining to pick up any sound. My mind raced, feverishly trying to make sense of it. Maybe I'd imagined the laugh. That had to be it. But the silence felt heavier now, pressing in from all sides. Lowering myself carefully to the floor, my knees groaned with dull, familiar pain. I reached out, groping around blindly until my fingers brushed the plastic casing of my phone. Clutching it tightly, I paused, afraid to turn it back on. Something about the darkness felt alive, like it was watching me. My trembling fingers finally closed around the phone, clutching it like a lifeline. Slowly, I raised my head, heart pounding. 2 faint dots of light flickered to my left, right where those absurd advertisements were pinned. With a shaky hand, I flipped the phone open. Its faint glow lit up the wall, tracing the outline of the clear plastic pockets that held the flyers. I held the phone up in front of me like a shield, my breath caught in my throat. The boy's photograph was still there, but the smiling child? Gone. Now his mouth hung open, one tooth missing from the gruesome, empty gap. Blood trickled from the space, a thin red line stretching downward, trailing across the metal wall and pooling on the floor below. A hoarse scream clawed its way out of my throat, but the oppressive darkness swallowed it whole. I blinked hard, once, twice, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The other 2 flyers vanished. In their place were new photographs, ones I didn't recognize. My breath quickened as I realized the walls were now covered with pictures of children. All of them, all missing teeth. Thick, red drops of blood swelled in the gaps of their broken smiles, threatening to drip at any moment. Then came the laughter. It rose from nowhere and everywhere all at once. A cruel, echoing sound filled the tight space, bouncing off the walls like 1,000 mocking voices. The dim light from the phone trembled, its glow flickering wildly as it darted from side to side in his shaky hands. "You can't," he croaked, his voice cracking under the weight of fear. Pressing himself hard against the locked elevator door, he screamed, "No, you're not real. You're dead." An icy, burning sensation rippled down his chest, sharp, stabbing, relentless, like frost-tipped needles piercing his heart. He clutched at his chest, gasping, his other hand gripping the phone so tightly his knuckles turned ghostly white. In one of the photographs, a child's small hand began to emerge. It was pale, thin, and smeared with wet, black earth. The hand groped at the air, inch by inch, closer and closer to him. Then another hand appeared, and another. Soon, dozens of tiny hands clawed toward him, their fingers grasping for his shirt, his face, his hair. Panic overtook him. He hurled the phone across the cabin, its faint light extinguished as it hit the floor. Darkness swallowed him, suffocating, absolute. Fumbling wildly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the tin box with trembling hands. "Is this what you want?" he rasped, his voice breaking into a ragged whisper. His lips curled into a bitter, deranged smile, teeth bared in defiance and fear. "Is this why you're here?" He laughed, a sharp, manic sound that echoed violently through the confined space. His trembling fingers flew to the lid of the box, snapping it open with a sudden, desperate motion. A narrow beam of light burst out, slicing through the oppressive darkness and briefly illuminating the writhing hands, the shadowy figures clawing ever closer. His wild eyes gleamed with madness, his chest heaving as he clutched the box tightly, protectively, to himself. "But you'll get nothing," he screamed, his voice raw, jagged. "Nothing. It's mine. Do you hear me? Mine." Tilting his head back, he poured the box's contents into his mouth. The brittle teeth clattered against his gums, sharp edges scraping his tongue as he began to chew. His laughter exploded, manic, deafening, growing louder with each grinding bite. Blood and spit splattered from his mouth, streaking the walls and pooling on the floor. Pieces of teeth, shattered, crushed, spat out with every scream, scattering like tiny bones around him. He laughed like a man possessed, his toothless gums grinding relentlessly against the brittle fragments of baby teeth. Screams tore from his throat, raw and inhuman, mingling with the crunching and spitting sounds that filled the air. Broken shards of teeth rained onto the floor, a grotesque testament to his unraveling sanity. It wasn't until a month later that they found the old man. The stench of decay had crept through the building, thick, putrid, and impossible to ignore, forcing the neighbors to call emergency services. The firemen broke down the door to his small apartment. What they discovered inside would haunt them for years. Samuel Irving was slumped on the floor of his bedroom, wearing nothing but his threadbare sailcloth underwear. His back rested against the bed frame, his head tilted unnaturally to one side, his lifeless eyes staring blankly at the doorway. His face was blackened, shriveled, and twisted into a grotesque mask of terror and madness. The hollow cavity of his rotted skull seemed to mock all who dared to look at him, a silent, eternal scream frozen in time. Beside him lay a small, empty candy tin, its lid snapped off and discarded. His mouth, locked in a ghoulish grin, was stuffed full of tiny, time-yellowed baby teeth. They were crammed tightly together, filling every inch of the dark maw like grotesque, rotted pearls. The sight of him, the unsettling grin, the eerie remains of the teeth, sent shockwaves through the building. Rumors spread like wildfire, whispers of dark secrets and ghostly retribution passing from neighbor to neighbor. The unease lingered for weeks, thick as the stench that had first betrayed his presence. And yet, the day had begun so mundanely.
We begin our Sunday radio program with a good morning,
the cheerful host had said, his voice bright and carefree, spilling from the old radio perched on the windowsill. Samuel Irving had stood by his slightly open window, scowling at the noisy kids playing below. Their shrill voices grated on his nerves worse, even, than the constant ache gnawing at his joints. With a heavy sigh, he turned away, shuffling toward the refrigerator. Gripping the handle with effort, his gnarled fingers strained as he pulled the white door open. He peered inside, his eyes narrowing as he scrutinized its meager contents. "I'll have to go to the store," he muttered. His voice, low and gravelly, was swallowed by the hum of the old appliance. "Can't live on kefir alone." He sighed again, the sound heavy with resignation, and started toward the bedroom to get dressed. But as he reached the doorway, a strange sensation washed over him, a chilling wave of déjà vu. It wasn't just a fleeting feeling. It was sharp, oppressive, like a shadow cast over his mind. It was as if he'd lived this exact moment before. The bitterness of the pills, the echo of laughter from the street, the barren refrigerator shelves. Every detail gnawed at the edges of his mind, too vivid, too exact. "It's nothing," he whispered to himself, his voice unsteady. "Just old age messing with me." But somewhere deep inside, an unsettling thought took root. A dark, persistent whisper that he couldn't ignore. What if this wasn't old age? What if he was trapped, endlessly reliving the same twisted reality, over and over again? Old age had played cruel tricks on him before. One moment he was stepping into the bedroom to get dressed. The next, he was standing in the hallway by the elevators, fully clothed. Confused, he frowned, his brow furrowed as he glanced down at himself. Corduroy pants, neatly buttoned shirt. Everything seemed to be in place. Still, a nagging unease clung to him, like a shadow that refused to let go. Samuel shook his head, trying to push the feeling aside. He reached out with a trembling hand to press the elevator button. Normally, he preferred the stairs. 9 flights were nothing, or at least they hadn't been in his younger years. But now, in his late 70s, those same 9 stories loomed like an insurmountable mountain. Today, his aching joints had won the argument. The new metal doors slid open with a sterile hum, smooth and silent. Samuel sighed heavily, his breath carrying the weight of reluctant surrender, before stepping inside. The cabin was cold, impersonal, a stark, clinical contrast to the worn, rattling elevator he'd grown accustomed to over the years. Those old elevators had been noisy, unpredictable, alive in a way. But these were steel cages, efficient and soulless. As the doors slid shut behind him, Samuel's eyes wandered to the flyers pinned neatly in their clear plastic holders on the walls. He shuddered. Best pizza in the neighborhood. Get 10% off your first order. Welcome to our family cafe. Discounts for kids. And then the last one. Dear parents, summer is coming soon. Enroll your children in our summer camp. A chill ran down his spine. Those flyers hadn't been there yesterday. He was certain of it. Absolutely certain. But now they stared back at him, mocking his memory. He clenched his fists, his knuckles whitening. No, he muttered, his voice low and unsteady. That's nonsense. Reaching out, he jabbed the button for the first floor, and the elevator jolted into its slow descent. But his thoughts lingered, circling back to the last flyer, to the boy in the photo. He remembered him, the mismatched eyebrows, the smudged paint on his face, the pale, unnaturally white forehead. A jolt of recognition hit him like a bolt of lightning, and he spun around suddenly, his breath catching in his throat. There, in the dimly lit elevator, stood the boy. His face was dirty, streaked with smudges of black and gray, and twisted with malice. His lips peeled back into a vicious grin, exposing his mouth, a gaping void of empty, bloody gums where teeth should have been. Samuel's legs buckled, and he stumbled back, slamming against the cold steel wall. The elevator jerked violently, shaking as if something massive had struck it from the outside. And then, it stopped.
And so, we begin our Sunday morning radio program with a bright and cheerful good morning.
My joints ached, more than usual that day. A dull, persistent throb that gnawed at my resolve.